The one, the only Shaun Moore. Welcome to the Disruptors. Thanks for coming today.
Thank you for having me.
So we've been trying to do this for a while, the nature of starting a startup. What's it like? Okay, no, let's not start there. Let's quickly get a 30,000 foot overview of you, what you do, and TrueFace before we get into it.
Sure. So we've been TrueFace has been, I would say, in R&D since early 2012. We started a company, myself and my co-founder, and the name of that company was Chewy, CHEY, and we were working on enabling access control through facial recognition for the smart home in 2013 through 2017. So we got our start in facial recognition by trying to understand how we could improve efficiency in people's lives and provide a higher level of security and safety. We took the knowledge from that and so essentially spun out TrueFace in 2017. And so with TrueFace, we're focused on pulling intelligence from existing camera infrastructure, meaning identifying patterns. Patterns are people's faces, their people's behavior, their age, license plates, guns, things that we can capture and provide instant feedback or instant data back to a client. So it's really around building intelligent infrastructure within the bounds of our existing cameras that are out there now.
If we build that kind of tech, how do we avoid becoming Palantir and then a social credit system and then a Minority Report?
Yeah, there's a lot of organization that would have to go into that, and frankly, I don't think we have it at the highest level. I think the concern that we hear the most with facial recognition is Big Brother is eye in the sky, and it's largely driven from what's reported on over in China. And I think what people don't care to really understand is the social implications of how these societies operate in a very different way. The individuals over in China have a different outlook on surveillance, on social credit than we do in the United States, and more broadly in North America, South America, and Europe. So I think it's really critical to dissect the society before placing blame on the technology. That's something that they've invested very, very heavily in, and we just get to see the reports in the news. Now, we're not living over there day to day, so we truly don't know the implications. I don't think that the United States or any of those areas of the world that I just mentioned will ever get to that stage, nor would ever want to see that. It's largely going to be driven by the advancements in compute power and facial recognition accuracy in real time. But I frankly just don't see the concern. I don't see that, as being an operator in the field, I don't see any company moving towards that, nor do I see any company wanting to move towards that. I'm very friendly with all of our competing CEOs, and we have a very, very similar outlook on the market and outlook on how this technology evolves in that sector. So, I understand the concern. I just don't think we're societally built to accept that, meaning that we're not going to ever get there. It's really not as much of a concern for me because I see how the benefits of this technology are being utilized, and that's far more interesting to all of us than surveillance.
I would agree that we wouldn't accept it, but I also would say that I think it's impossible not to go towards and eventually get to it. So let's play the devil's advocate scenario. How many terrorist attacks do we need to incrementally go further and further? Well, every time the increment happens, people forget what the old norm was. We forget when we didn't have to take off our shoes to go in the bathroom. We forget
Right.
when we could smoke in who was it? Smoking in the planes. Kind of things come out of fashion, out of norm, because they're forced out. 9/11 happened and things changed. I don't see how we don't go towards that slippery slope as people see the possibility of increased safety.
Yeah, again, it comes down to the structure of our government and the checks and balances in place. Now, there are organizations that lobby and petition against these types of advancements in technology. Voices are heard across every level of the government on why or why not this technology should be used for surveillance and for surveilling people of interest. I think realizing the actual burden on infrastructure is hard to comprehend. If we're actually trying to recognize every single person's face in real time across all of our cities and all of our states in the United States, it is a significant load on infrastructure, one in which we're absolutely not ready to take on. The other piece of that is you have to question why we would want to do that. When you walk down the street, the government or whoever is looking for individuals don't really care, frankly. What they care is that they have a list of 500 people that are potentially threatening to that environment or to that city, and they want to keep a look on them. Now, if everyone in the United States really was concerned about their privacy, they wouldn't be on social media. They wouldn't be shopping on the big websites. I think it gets pulled over our eyes because we see the convenience of it. We get a like on Facebook and we're excited. We get a like on Instagram and we're excited. We buy something from Amazon and it arrives at our door that same day. You see a tangible benefit there. So you're willing to give up that information, well, either unwilling or willing to give up that information, but either way you're doing it. So you are absolutely, your keystrokes where you look at on the internet is absolutely being recorded, stored. There's been recent announcements about how smart home devices were listening in on conversations. We've all seen this, right? And it is something of a science fiction type of future that we didn't think we'd get to this quickly. But this stuff is absolutely already happening. It's just happening without your knowledge, or it's happening with your knowledge, but not to the extent that you realize. So, I think we have to take that back a step and say, well, what are we concerned about if I'm being watched on a city corner? What does that mean to me as a person if my face is being recognized when I walk into a stadium? And once we kind of unpeel the onion there and discover what people are actually concerned about, I think the conversation is more fruitful because we understand then what limitations have to be in place with this technology. I'm all for regulation, but the regulators have to understand how this technology works. We end up getting another situation that happened with Facebook, where you've got legislators who don't understand what a social network is. So I'm all for regulating this technology, and I think all of my competing companies and CEOs are as well. It just has to be done properly, and we have to be a voice at that table so we can properly discuss and properly explain the limitations that we have with the technology now. So, to kind of bring this full circle back, and I know I just spoke for a while, but the concern here for me is that people see this technology and they think surveillance. It's just frankly not the case.
So let's talk about some of the pros. Let's get into some of the pros, because there are a ton of pros. What are the awesome use cases of facial recognition? How does it make people's lives better? We all know about the benefits of technology that also harms us, like Facebook. What are the benefits of facial?
I would say that my favorite story that involves facial recognition is a company over in India that found 3,000 missing children in 4 days. That's an extremely powerful tool. And, I don't think we can comprehend the emotion that has to bring that back to the family that had lost those children. So, without that technology running on those street corners, you don't find those children. So, again, it's a balance there. It's what are you looking for? That to me is a really important initiative. We're currently working on, identifying people who are known to be sex traffickers, minors that are being trafficked across borders, and things like that. Those are critically important to our lives. I mean, as a company, that's something that we get behind very, very quickly. And so, to me, that's an incredible way and use of this technology. You move into kind of the efficiency and the security piece, knowing who's at a pro game, a pro sports game, is something that's becoming more and more important. With our, unfortunately, with the climate that we have and the gun issues that we continue to run into, it's a risk now. And I think people are starting to see it more and more. And so if you decide you don't want to go to a concert because of fear, is there a way in which technology can help mitigate that fear or that risk to you by being able to identify a potential threat? That's another interesting way to look at this technology. Now, there's things like efficiency for access control or security and safety, entering a building. We see that quite a bit. So, there's different levels and different prongs to where this technology is applicable for safety, security, and convenience. 100% of international travelers by 2023 will be entering the United States with some sort of facial recognition system. So that's to ensure that the people that are entering are who they say they are on their documentation. I think it really is providing a safer environment, and that's one in which we deserve to live in.
how much of the safer environment argument for the stadiums, et cetera, with the shooters, is people trying to come up with a more technical solution to a problem? So, for instance, my doctor wants to give me a pill because my weight's too high and my blood sugar is out of whack. I could diet and eat healthy and exercise, or he can give me this little technical
Sure.
fix all pill, which kind of doesn't fix the internal problem. So the shooter problem is something else entirely. Is it just putting a band-aid on that, or trying to?
I don't think it is. We're starting to get a lot more involved in identifying weapons in real time at schools. And if you go back and look at some of the footage from the larger school shootings in the United States, one specific instance, an individual pulls a gun out in a hallway or in a stairwell, sorry, and paces back and forth, back and forth, back and forth for quite a bit of time, enough time that we could have reacted. Had our technology been running on those cameras, we could have shut the school down before a shot was ever fired. So I think it does start to act as somewhat of a deterrent, but also it enables faster reaction. It's not pre-crime. We're not trying to get into preventative crime. That is Minority Report, right? So I think, if we can aid in decision making, that's something that we want to do. Taylor Swift was using facial recognition to identify potential stalkers at her shows. So, I think that we're seeing interesting uses for this technology, but that to me is providing her peace of mind that when she goes to perform, that she's safe. So I do think that there are, I understand your example of are we putting a Band-Aid on it? But I think we're actually empowering people with data that they can make better decisions now about if there are threats.
So let's talk regulations. You brought up the Zuckerberg example, and we know the regulators don't know jack about pretty much anything they're regulating. So what do we need to think about in terms of regulating facial recognition technology and AI in general along those avenues? What do we need to think about? How do we do it effectively, and what would those look like?
It's a great question. If I knew the answer, I would be in that position in the government.
Well, maybe it depends on the government.
True. So, I think first and foremost, there has to be a separation of facial recognition. Like, facial recognition encompasses a lot of things. It encompasses one-to-one verification on your phone, and then it encompasses one-to-end, verification of a potential shoplifter in a retail environment. Those are two very, very different instances of how the technology can be used. So I think first and foremost, it has to be defined. It has to be defined in that vertical or in that silo in which it's being used. Because if you were to mass regulate facial recognition, then, well, guess what? You can't use your phone to log into your phone, or you can't use your face to log into your phone. So you have to split those use cases out by, what is the intention of the individual? Are they trying to gain access to something? Have they opted in? Have they explicitly given consent? And so once you start to break that down, I think that the legislation piece becomes a lot easier, because if you're giving consent, then you should have access to use facial recognition in the way that you want to. Now, if it's facial recognition for something like a retail environment, there has to be some sign on the door that says this environment is under facial recognition surveillance. And here's why. It's not because we want to know X, Y, and Z. It's because they lose so much money a year with repeat offenders that are shoplifting and that are, essentially building up that shrinkage that they have. So, I think there has to be transparency with how people are using this technology. And that's a really big piece to what we're doing. And I put a public statement out a few months back about total transparency with our clients. So, we greatly urge our clients to explain to their customers how they're using this technology, not just that they're using it, but how and why. Because I think that's what helps build the public trust, and that's what helps build trust within the ecosystem. So, from a legislative standpoint, you really have to look at how the technology is being used and what disclosures need to be made. And then I think everything else, basically falls into place. But that's, the short of what could be a very, very long conversation.
So with the bird scooters, they all said, make sure you park this nice along the sides here and do all of these things. They kind of put it off on the customers, and the customers sure as hell didn't do any of that. How do you think about that in terms of tech companies developing software, developing solutions, not only facial recognition, but just in general, and then having clients or other people use that tech for different purposes. So I built the robot, but it's not my fault that the robot has a sword and killed someone.
Right. I think that's a problem that we've dealt with for a very long time. It's the same, kind of parallel to are guns bad or the people that use guns bad. So, I think that when we work with companies, we intimately get to know, those companies, those purchasers, what they're using the technology for, how they plan to implement it, how they're going to store data, how they're going to encrypt data. So we have really good insight into who our customers are and how they're using this technology. I'm not sure if that's the same for the rest of the companies in our space, but that's one way we mitigate that risk. So we can pull the plug at any time. We can say we don't like this. We don't like the way that you're using our technology. You're not abiding by the principles that we sent you, that you signed off on. We're pulling the plug. So if we were in that situation, we would absolutely do that. We have not been in a situation where anyone's tried to misuse our technology.
What do you think about the Google employees walking out about Google going into China, or the Amazon employees protesting the facial recognition stuff?
Honestly, I think it's great.
For the U.S. government.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think that they should have a voice. For us, we have an open forum about our sales funnel and who we're talking to. And if anyone wants to speak up, they absolutely have the freedom to do so, and we'll take that into a meeting. So I think that's great. I think that we are building the brains to, a larger societal improvement. And it's important that we take the perspective of everyone really and understand what is a driving factor to the reason that they don't want to participate in this, or that they want to walk out of the office, and really break it down that way. I know Amazon's been getting a lot of negative press around their use of facial recognition with the government, and it's an interesting thing to me, because we're seeing the continued adoption by the government of facial recognition technology, and I do know that there are a few instances where they're moving away from Amazon because of it. Now, is that because Amazon has taken people's pictures that didn't agree to be in a database and are using that to scan against, a potential, like a criminal database? I don't know. I don't have any insight into how Amazon has collected their data, if they've done it appropriately. And so I think that's where the concern becomes is how are these companies collecting this data? How are they using this data? And are they creating a mass database that they can then resell? I can tell you right now that we're not. All of our clients create and maintain their own databases. So we don't go to them with a database of 100 million people and say, hey, have at it, go have fun, find out, find who you want to find. That's inappropriate, in my opinion, because you didn't give anyone the option of opting into that, and it's not public information. So it just doesn't seem appropriate. So that's how we've tackled that, is we silo all of our clients. They have to build their own databases of people that they're interested in recognizing, and then they keep it to themselves. We don't cross-pollinate or share any client databases with any other clients.
How do you think about the difference between working with companies and working with governments? So this is kind of what we were talking about before. I would say companies will probably have a lot more restraint in terms of how they employ things, but governments inherently, if a government is anything, it's inefficient, and it becomes more and more inefficient and larger over time, because that's the nature of bureaucracy. We definitely see this with the US. And in terms of surveillance, in terms of having insight into people, just like Facebook, they want to keep as much data as possible, and they want to have as much. So facial recognition, and then ultimately not just facial recognition, but neural nets in terms of analyzing people's facial expressions to anticipate what they're going to do. How do you think about that future?
It's an interesting one. I think surveillance has been around since the government has been created. Any government has been created. That dates back to the earliest civilization, that they were watching for other people that could potentially uprise against them. So I think that the word surveillance, it long dates technology, really, or what we know as technology. I think the government has they have obviously a different use than private companies who are trying to drive ROI on revenue, or return users, return customers, or even safety into a building. We treat those conversations with the government that we have the same we would with any client. We want to know how they're using the technology. We want to know what they're using it for and make sure that it is an appropriate use case that we want to help support. So it's kind of up to the company. It's up to who they're working with, and we've drawn a hard line about what we will and what we won't do, and that's public information that I put out a couple months ago. So I think that the government is already collecting information on people. They have been forever. This is just another data source for them to use. It's never, in our opinion, it's not meant to be a single source of decision making, meaning that it's meant to augment other information. Just like at a court case, you take in all the evidence that you need to make a decision. This is a piece of evidence, or this is a piece of information to be used in a broader understanding of that situation. So again, there are many use cases with the government that this technology can be deployed. One of the ones that we're working on is with the Air Force right now, and it's for base security. So access control to bases, and it's to ensure that the people coming in are the right people. I think that's a great use of this technology. I think that there are a lot of things that we want to protect on our military bases, both here and abroad, and to make sure that the right people are entering is something that is critical to those continuing to maintain their privacy, or the security of those individuals on that base. So I think that's a great use case. Again, I think if you're worried about being tracked, you can't use a cell phone, you can't use a credit card. If you really sit down and think about how much information you give on in a day, it's pretty mind-blowing. I think about when I travel, I pay with my credit card to book the airplane, then I use an app to book a hotel. It would take, literally seconds to figure out, just based on my credit card and my bank statements, where I was in the world and what I was doing. So it's really not difficult. I think for just adding new technology to this, it's just a way to understand, is this a potentially threatening situation when you are talking about surveillance? But again, there are many different facets of this technology within the government that don't include surveillance. It can be purely access control, or purely certain individuals have access to a certain room in a certain building that if you don't have clearance, you can't enter. That's a great use of the technology, because now we have a photographic record of everyone that came in there, and we'll know if anything was misplaced or misused based on who came in. So, again, I think it's such a broad topic, or it's such a broad deployment. Artificial intelligence as a collective industry, really. That's where we get into human behavioral analysis, and we can take millions and millions and millions and millions of data points, billions of data points, and start to understand how humans move and behave. If you really want to go to it, it's like our behavior is all math. It's all probability, and it's probability based on the next hurdle that we see. And so when you start to map out human behavior, you can maybe potentially start to get into predictive analytics based on billions of inputs. And we're definitely not there. It's not something that we're working on, but the technology is in a place where it could reach that in a few years. You think about neural nets and deep learning and machine learning, all under the artificial intelligence umbrella. And the more information you feed it, hypothetically speaking, the better the cleaner that information is that you feed it, the better your output's going to be. And it's the same thing with bias when it comes to facial recognition. If you have clean and proportionate data that represents the population that you're looking for, you're not going to have bias on the output. You're not going to run into that. It's math. And so, when you think about behavioral analysis, it's the same thing. If we get enough proportionate data for how people make decisions and behave, you can start to make some predictions just based on past events.
Yeah, it's a little crazy. It's also a little crazy if you don't have enough data. The Google algorithms that were identifying Black people as gorillas, for God's sakes, because we forgot. Right.
It was horrible. I mean, it really is. And my question is, how does that get into production? Right? Where is the quality? Where is the internal check there? That I can't actually fathom how that happened, because there has to be an internal check, and maybe it was just too early in the space, but there has to be an internal check there. You can proportionately see the balance of the data that you have in, and you would be able to know if there's going to be bias coming out of that algorithm. So, I mean, I think that was in 2015 or 2016.
What's the state of the art today? So let's say we've got people in a crowd. What does it look like in terms of what can be done and how accurate the reporting is? I know right now, like in London, they were having some problems with the cameras and trying to find criminal offenders.
Mm-hmm. It largely depends on camera infrastructure. So, just because there are great cameras out there, it doesn't mean that people have invested in that infrastructure at this stage.
When
So,
you say infrastructure, do you mean the quality of the camera or the placement or both?
both. Traditionally, these cameras were not put up around, especially a city like London, to really recognize faces in real time. They were positioned there to help either solve a crime or catch a criminal that was doing something on the go. So they weren't really meant for reading faces, and that overhaul of camera infrastructure. We're starting to see it happen, but it's a very big investment. That's why I personally don't think 3D cameras on a broad level will be implemented as quickly as some would have thought, because of the cost. If you've got how many thousand cameras, I think Atlanta had 15,000 cameras running for the Super Bowl. If you have to replace those cameras, that's a significant hardware cost. And then you have to have the processing power to understand that information that's being fed into that system. So, when I hear that, what I think is an efficiency. I know in Atlanta they were having people watch all these feeds. You're not going to catch anything. You're just not going to. There's not enough brain power to watch 15,000 camera feeds and spot the one person that's doing something mischievous. It's not possible. And so if we can aid in that, if we can say this looks like someone doing XYZ, now you can put someone on that to start to investigate it further to see if there is an action that needs to be taken. I'm going to be in Berlin this month to talk about what was happening at Oktoberfest last year, and they hired, I think it was 20 some super recognizers to sit in a room and try and pick out people of interest. So you're doing facial recognition. You're just a couple steps back. You're having people that have this unbelievable talent of recognizing faces, study potentially threatening faces, and then try to pick them out of a crowd in low lighting and bad angles and things like that. So, I trust technology. I trust math at that stage more than I do the human eye.
I would say for the faces, yeah. Once you get down to the body language and Secret Service type of stuff, I think it's a little different, but I think computers will probably get there. We're just not quite there yet.
I'd agree with that. I think faces at this point, we are reaching very, very, very high levels of accuracy. And if you think about it, today is the worst day that we'll ever have in terms of accuracy, across the board. And some companies, and ours included, are scoring 99s on some of these benchmark exams. So you're reaching a critical point of accuracy. And the more data that we can train models on that is proportionate to the population, the closer to 100% we can get that.
What does your work make you think about the future of autonomous vehicles and AI, especially in the visual side of things?
Autonomous vehicles, I think, are very interesting. I think autonomous trucking is what's the most intriguing to me. If you can send a truck from LA to New York and not have to work in 8-hour shifts, and you can do it efficiently and securely, that to me becomes very interesting. I rode in a somewhat autonomous vehicle in Las Vegas not too long ago, and I think there's a lot of work to be done there, but it's very interesting, because if you can start to get cars to talk to other cars, to talk to emergency vehicles, to talk to the street lights and things like that, it's just efficiency. And I think based on investment over the last year and a half, 2 years, in some of these these new types of ownership structures of cars, it just shows you where even the BMWs of the world are thinking about how owning a car will evolve with our generation. So I think autonomous driving, autonomous cars is absolutely something that's here to stay. the risk there, and we're in some discussions about this too, is identifying the passengers and ensuring that they are the right people in those cars, and ensuring that for me personally, it's ensuring the safety of that system running the car, because if you can sit outside your house and hack into someone's car, it becomes a very big risk. And so, the connectivity, while yes, it is truly amazing, is also a very big risk if it's not protected right.
Absolutely, yeah. Drive it off the bridge. It's
Right.
There's definitely some dystopian ones, but there's so many more positive outlooks. What technologies are you most excited about, and why?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm very excited after I saw the IPO of one of the plant-based burgers recently. I think those two companies are doing incredible things in that industry, and I, looking at how Burger King and White Castle have reacted is truly remarkable. They're both taking on, I think it's Impossible Burgers, and the other one is the one that just IPO'd. Um, for those two companies to take those ideas and that business model on is something that excites me, because it shows a transition or a shift in mindset. And I think when we shift in mindset as a culture and a society, a lot more creativity opens up there. So I'm very excited about what those two companies are doing right now and what they'll continue to do from a technical standpoint. Truly, the advancements in artificial intelligence, I think, are what will propel our society to advance a lot faster than anyone had expected. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. I don't think anyone does. I think there absolutely are concerns, and I think that if the operators and the owners and the creatives and the thinkers don't take the time to sit back and recognize that not all of this is good, then we get to a place where we don't want to be a lot faster. So it's difficult for me to project out what does 5 to 10 years of evolution in artificial intelligence look like. But having been in this industry now since 2002, I can tell you that in the last 7 years, it's unbelievable the advancements that have been made in facial recognition or object recognition. So I don't see any slowing down with China investing billions and billions of dollars in it. Now our government wanting to invest a lot of money in it as well. I think we're in that exploratory phase. There is market adoption, but for this to be a truly powerful technology, there's still a lot of things that have to be understood and figured out, and there's a lot of restrictions that have to be in place. Data transfer becomes very, very big. I think the biggest concern to me is that when you start to put everything online, the propensity for that to be hacked or leaked is so much higher. And that goes to your autonomous driving question. If cars are online, if all of our information is already online, but if it's kept in a easier to obtain environment, then the risk is significant. And if there's routes from that information into the credit system in the United States, or your banking accounts, I think that the more you start to tie these things together, it becomes a risk if it's not done properly. And I think that there's a lot of thinking that has to be done there.
Becomes a risk, and it becomes a honeypot as well.
Correct.
Definitely what people are aiming for. In terms of the Impossible Burger, are you more excited about vegetarian type solutions as a meat replacement, or clean meat, lab grown meat?
I'm more excited that they were able to take this, from what I've seen, non-mainstream idea and get public buy-in. So I'm more excited about the population shift of exploring a meatless alternative. So it's not necessarily about the meat production facilities or that. It's more of the mindset shift, which I know from growing up in the Midwest, it's steak and potatoes. I went to school in Texas; it's more steak and potatoes. So I'm not siding one way or the other. I just think the societal shift in the mindset is truly incredible, and you're seeing buy-in from some of the largest players in the meat industry. So it's just I think a very cool time to witness a mindset shift.
I feel like we'll be seeing a lot of these. I remember I was talking to someone a little ways back, and I was like, "What would it be like to have worked your entire career at Coke or Pepsi and kind of
Right.
know you were the marketing guy selling diabetes for years? I mean, you want to get on whatever new solution you can because you're
Right.
doing something beneficial for people. I mean, I could see. I hope we can see that happening in a lot of areas. Oil companies jumping to renewable. Basically,
Right.
they're jumping for anything that can help you sleep at night.
Yeah, and I think that with those large companies like Coke, Burger King, McDonald's, they were mass producing for different times in our political history. There are reasons to mass produce food during times of war. There are reasons to mass produce food to fulfill a population's need to eat. So I think that now with the understanding of the implications of what this food is doing to the human body and the human mind, we're seeing people think creatively and think differently, and that's really important to the evolution of our society.
So I know your background before this was more on the content and mobile side of things.
Mhm.
Where do you see that space headed now that we've kind of reached or seem to have reached peak smartphone and certainly peak iPhone?
That's a great question. I remember in 2011 and 12, we were trying to pitch some of the largest media companies in the US on building mobile apps. And they told us that it was not needed. They were never going to need mobile apps for their content, which had changed about 3 years after that. So, I think that they were still a little stuck in their ways. That space to me is very interesting. I think that the mobile phone space is very innovative. It is providing an exceptional level of convenience to us. Being able to order something on your phone and have it delivered increases laziness, but it could also increase productivity depending on why you're doing that. So I think that iPhones, other smartphone providers are going to have to start thinking about engagement beyond what they've already put out, because, and I'm sure they are, but everyone has an expectation now of what a phone should do, and if they don't continue to exceed that expectation, you're going to wonder why you don't switch to the other one or the other one. And then prices will go down. So I have no idea. I haven't operated, in that space for 7 years now, so I haven't had a bunch of time to think through it. But I personally am trying to use my phone less. I leave it at home when I leave the house now. I think that we're going to start to see people move away from that always on, always connected mindset over the next 5 years when we realize the emotional strain that it has on us. So they're going to have to figure something out when you're not always wanting to be on your devices.
Yeah, I mean, Steve Jobs wore like one shirt, so he didn't have to make decisions. Every time
Right.
you decide not to look at your phone, it's a decision. It's
Right.
yeah, it's definitely challenging. We talked positives. What technologies scare you the most and why?
Um, I would say robots, because they're when you start to physical robots, when you start to program these units, we can call them these robots, with what would be decision making power, they have the strength to cause damage. They have the power or the force to cause damage, and so I think that's a little concerning. It plays into my industry quite a bit, because that would be the brain powering it. But I think that's a little, to me, a little sci-fi thriller type of technology that we're looking at, and we're seeing, some advancements in robotics very quickly. So I don't know enough about it to say that it truly is scary. It's just something that I've observed that concerns me a little.
And you're in LA now. What's the most interesting stuff you see happening out there?
I think the last mile transportation has really been, an incredible disruption to the way people travel here in LA. I was in San Francisco when they dropped them all in the streets there, and there was just public outrage about it. And then moved on to LA to kind of see the same thing happen. To me, that it really is an incredible way for people to get, from point A to point B very quickly and with least resistance. You're not sitting in traffic. LA is a city known for its traffic. You're not sitting in traffic. You've got an option to take a scooter or a bike, and you can do it for, pennies on the dollar. So I think that has been kind of the most interesting thing that I've seen over the few months that I've lived here. There's some stuff in media that I'd like to get more involved with, just to understand how brands are thinking about advertising or marketing to consumers. But I would say the last mile transportation and just the way transportation is working, that the company Fair, I think, was the startup that raised the most money in LA, and they're changing the process in which the millennial generation purchases cars. So you can essentially monthly subscribe to a car for a couple $100s. So I think that the transportation industry is becoming increasingly interesting to me.
Because it was incredibly inefficient. Yeah, transportation is very interesting. It's also huge.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to see travel. I mean, I travel quite often for work, and so that process is still one of the most stressful things you can put yourself through. So I would like to see some efficiencies or some changes in that process.
What's the most stressful part?
I think it's the waiting, it's the impatience, it's you're in a mass place with with a bunch of people that are either trying to rush to get somewhere, they're arguing with someone about not getting on a flight. It's just a pit of anger. And so when you're surrounded by all this negativity and then you're waiting in line, your flight gets delayed, it kind of goes back to human expectation. When you're expecting to board a plane at a certain time and there are these disruptions throughout, the 2 hours before that, it just builds on you. And then you're sitting on a plane for, a couple hours, you get to where you're going. There's just so many steps in which you could meet disruption or meet some form of hurdle, and I think that it's difficult to deal with if you're doing that every week.
Yeah, it would be terrible. Where do you think, in terms of automation, we're headed? Do you think more jobs, less jobs? Any thoughts on the process?
Yeah, this is a great debate. Everyone was worried that when Uber and Lyft came out, that they were going to eliminate taxi jobs. To some extent they did, but they also employed thousands of other people. And some of those, individuals who drove taxis are now driving for those two companies. So I think with any innovation, you're going to have a reduction at the tail end of that employment bracket, and you're going to create a new one. So, automation, I do think that, yes, it will displace people. There are people that won't have the skills or won't have acquired the skills previously to take those new positions on. But I think it's what needs to happen for the advancement of society, truly. If you say, no, we can't automate this position because it's going to knock out 100,000 jobs. Well, instead of saying no, let's say, well, how can we create 200,000 new jobs now with this technology, now that we know how to use this technology? So I'm all for it. I just think that we need to reframe the concept of it removing people from the workforce, and really think about how does this create an opportunity to create a new subject matter in school where we're focused on autonomous engineering, stuff like that, where it's more of an opportunity than it is a consequence to advancing technology.
If you had to add one subject to school and take one out, what would you do?
Oh, that's a tough question. I would add some sort of financial management, bookkeeping, paying taxes. I don't think, I personally got no instruction on how to manage healthcare, how to manage, personal tax.
It's hard. It's horrible as an entrepreneur too, because the system is not built for it at all.
Not at all. So I would have really, really liked that bit. How to be an adult, really.
You
How to
should
be,
you should share that with 500.
yeah, I should.
Uh,
That would be a great class to have. It truly would. Taking class out, I'm not sure there. I haven't been around the curriculum for quite some time, so I don't know what's been added. I think if meditation is not taught in schools, or yoga, that they should absolutely be taught in schools. Meditation, probably more importantly. I think some concept of mental health should be added, and I think some concept of being an adult and being able to pay your healthcare and to understand what healthcare plans mean for you, how to pay your taxes. It's just something that you didn't have to do most people don't have to do growing up on their own. And when you get thrown into the workforce, you're expected to know it right away. And I just think that they should teach you. Our education department should teach us that.
I listened to a podcast one time, and the guy was redesigning the tax system for a specific county in California. And he essentially got it down to a single piece of paper. If you're a W-2 employee, you get this pre-populated tax form, which has your income, it has how much you're probably going to owe, and you can just file it. It saved so much time. It saved so much money. Everyone loved it, and it got shut down because QuickBooks didn't want to make it too easy for you to do your taxes, or whichever the H&R Block, whichever one it was.
Right.
And it's insane how there are things like that that are just so convoluted because that's where people make money. It's the same thing with healthcare. I signed up for healthcare in Switzerland. My wife is Swiss. In 5 minutes, we looked at, here's the high plan, here's the low plan. Everything is legally mandated. Is
Right.
a lot of the problems there just the U.S. model?
I think it's ripe for disruption. I do think that foundationally it needs to change because it is so complicated. And if you can't hire an advisor that can walk you through every stage of it, you're missing out on some money. You're missing out on some potential benefit on that plan. So yeah, I just think that from a foundational, perspective, that there are absolutely issues there. And we're not taught it. So we're not taught what to look for. We're not taught how to do that. So you rely on a friend of a friend who says his cousin is a financial advisor and can help you, or a tax accountant and can help you. So I just think it would be very important to educate people on that.
Or a blog post with affiliate links where you think you're getting good information, so you find out that they're just going for the best option for them.
Right. Incentive, right? It's what's the incentive for that person to recommend that provider or that, assistance.
It all comes down to incentives. Speaking of, how do you think about incentives, specifically who to take money from when you do have a company you're building that in the wrong hands could be problematic?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very important. It's very, very important that when you raise money, when we specifically raise money, we are partnering with people. You're entering into a legal agreement, one not too dissimilar from marriage, where you're now talking to these individuals once, twice, 3 times a day, and they have more insight, than maybe your parents or your girlfriend, your wife, whoever it is. So it's very important that you align from day one. And I think that, being a 22-year-old in Silicon Valley, you're told if you raise money, you've made it, or you've made it to the next bracket of success. And that's just, it's a really problematic mindset to have, because you're going to drive people to take money that they shouldn't be taking, just to take money, just to raise money, to have, that notch on their belt. And I think that's, it's difficult to navigate at that young of an age, because when someone says, we'll give you $2 or $3 million, $4 million, you're just excited. There's so many emotions that run through your head about what you could do with that, how you can, grow your company with that type of money. So, I think having run a company now for 7 years, I've gotten to grow within that mindset. And now, we are really, really diligent about who we want to partner with on the investment front, and what that means strategically to the company, I can't say enough good things about the investors that we've brought on. They've been incredibly helpful from a personal perspective, as well as helping the company grow. So we're very very diligent with how we go about finding those people.
Yeah, it's tough. There's no such thing as a free lunch in
Right.
almost all situations.
Right. Yeah. Again, I think you just said it goes back to incentives. It does. You have to make sure incentives are aligned the first conversation that you have. Otherwise, it's a waste of time, or you're going to get yourself into a potentially toxic relationship with, someone that has a different end goal for you. It is critical that you take the right money and not just any money.
Yes. What sci-fi movie or book do you think we're most headed towards, and why?
I do hear the Minority Report reference fairly often. I don't think pre-crime is something that we're really headed towards, but I do think that Hollywood has some insight on predictability into what the future of technology looks like. I don't know how they do.
They hired like 10 futurists for Minority Report. Apparently, that's how they did such a good job, is they went through all the futurist planning session strategies to figure out what it's actually going to look like as much as you can.
Yeah, I mean, they did a great job.
They did a scarily good job.
It was before its time, that's for sure. I don't watch a whole lot of movies, so I don't have a good reference point there. Nor do I read much science fiction. So, I think one of the books that struck me, I think it was called Oval or Circle. I don't know if you read that book or even saw that movie. I read the book. That book struck me as something that hypothetically could happen. And you can see the character who is, have you read the book? I don't know if you have.
I've seen the movie trailer.
Yes. Okay. So the young woman who's the kind of main character in that, you can see how the societal pressure or the pressure of being in that business forces her to make a decision that I don't know if she would have on her own, but it appears to be free will. So, I think that there is potential for stuff like that to happen in this very high pressured society. That would be very concerning to me. So if we are going towards that, it's not something I would want to be part of.
You mean like Keeping Up with the Joneses?
Yes, but in like a full transparent. So, without ruining anything, the goal of that business is to get people to go full transparent and to wear cameras 24/7, so you can have 24/7 insight into their lives, and they can start to control and manipulate what you do. Because
you mean Amazon? You mean Amazon?
Without saying it,
people are so happy to put the Alexas and the Google Homes into their houses, and it's just like, you guys just don't get it, do you? I would give them away if I was Google or Amazon. I would give them away. Jesus, just an Amazon Prime membership alone is enough for them to automatically make it worth their money.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I definitely do not own one, but you said it, not me.
I am very happy to say it. I've said it plenty of times before. Everyone knows Facebook's scary, but Facebook also really doesn't have much of a value proposition. It's more like you're on the boat that's sinking and just waiting for something better, but there's not really something better yet, so you're stuck on the boat.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think and I know they're going through a restructure based on their last announcements. It'll be interesting.
Restructure.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see, what the future value of Facebook is. They do have a lot of information on people, on their friends, on, images of people at parties, at events around the world. So I don't know what they can how they can tie that together. If they can, it may be valuable, outside of just purely selling your information for profit.
Just wait till the EU comes up with a new law that you have to show people information upon logging in and say, do you want to delete all your information? That's kind of all they would need to do to kill Facebook.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting. We're definitely headed towards an interesting future. If you had to leave people with one thing, a quote, a call to action, it can be anything, before you tell them where to find you and a little bit more about you, what would it be?
I would say do your research. Do your research and think against the common thought. or the public thought. I think we're inundated with information, and no one cares to go fact check it and actually understand the implications of that information. So I think when we live in this always on society of news just being, put in front of our face, did you hear about this? Did you hear about that? This guy said this guy said that. It creates a reactive culture, one in which we don't sit down and analyze the information. We just take it at face value and go tell someone else about it. So I would say it's very important to do your research, check your sources, and really start to take what people are telling you and think the opposite side and see if you can make a case for it.
It's funny. I was listening to a podcast and they were bringing up the fact that 10, 20 years ago, it's like when you were talking to someone online, everyone seemed smarter than you because they had so much extra time. You would get whatever it was, and then you'd go and respond several hours or a day later, and you have this time to be considerate. Now it's just a quick response off of your phone when something pings you on Twitter, and we have gone very far in the opposite direction.
Yep. Yeah. It's incredible. I mean, it really is. So yeah, I think the information's out there. It's up to people and the effort that they want to put in to actually understand, what's true and what's not.
Amen. Where's the best place for people to find you?
They can find some info about our TrueFace on www.trueface.ai. You can find me on LinkedIn and at Twitter. Shaun P. Moore, I think, is the Twitter handle.
Awesome. Thanks for coming on today, Shaun. Hope this has been fun, guys. Hope you've enjoyed it. A deep dive into the interesting future where we're headed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Cheers.